Nearly 2 weeks on from the Hamas attack on Israel, a major development as 2 of the hostages are released. This is a Sky News special programme on the Israel-Hamas war. We're live in Jerusalem. Tonight, Israel confirms mother and daughter Judith and Natalie Raanan have been released by Hamas at the Gaza border. The move offers some hope for the families of other hostages taken on October the 7th, including 20 children. Meanwhile, the UN Secretary-General makes an emotional plea at the Rafah border crossing, but aid needed desperately by civilians under siege has yet to enter Gaza.
These trucks are not just trucks. They are a lifeline. They are the difference between life and death for so many people.
Let's go straight to the US State Department and Antony Blinken.
Additional Americans who remain unaccounted for in this conflict. We know that some of them are being held hostage by Hamas, along with an estimated 200 other hostages held in Gaza. They include men, women, young boys, young girls, elderly people from many nations. Every single one of them should be released. Since the earliest hours of this crisis, the President has made clear that he will do everything possible to secure the release of every hostage. During my own recent travel to the region, I emphasized the urgency and importance of this to the United States and pressed our partners to do everything they can to help us secure the release. Since that time, we've continued to work relentlessly with partners to do just that. I can't speak publicly about the details of these efforts. I know you understand that. But the urgent work to free every single American, to free all other hostages, continues, as does our work to secure the safe passage out of Gaza for the Americans who are trapped there. In this particular instance, I want to thank the government of Qatar for their very important assistance. When I was in Israel last week, I met with the families of U.S. citizens that Hamas has taken hostage. President Biden, too, had the opportunity to hear directly from the families. It's impossible to adequately put into words the agony they're feeling of not knowing the fate of their loved ones. Worrying relentlessly about them, for their safety, for their security, for their well-being. No family anywhere should have to experience this torture. What I shared with the families, as the President did as well, is that the entire United States government will work every minute of every day to secure their release, to bring their loved ones home. They have my solemn pledge, those who continue to have loved ones held hostage by Hamas, that we'll continue to do that, working as though these family members were our own. With that, I'm happy to take a few questions.
Mr. Secretary.
So, thanks for coming down, Mr. Secretary. You said you couldn't talk about specific details, but I'm wondering, you did thank the government of Qatar, and I'm wondering, since you were there, and they have an office, they host a Hamas office, if you could elaborate a little bit on what their role was, and if you continue to think that that channel there, them having an office there, is worthwhile. And then secondly, a lot has been made by you, by the President, by other officials about how it is important for Israel once, if and when it begins a ground incursion into Gaza, for it to respect the rules of war internationally. And I'm curious if you think that to date, even before that ground incursion has started, if Israel is respecting those rules and laws. Thank you.
Matt, thanks for the questions. You'll understand that because this is an ongoing effort to get Americans who are hostage in this moment in Gaza out to secure their release, to get them back with their families. I really can't go into any details about what we're doing, how we're doing it. And all I can say with regard to Qatar is, in this instance, we very much appreciate their assistance. Beyond that, I really can't say, because again, we want to focus on making sure that we're getting those who remain hostage back home and with their loved ones. That's the single most important thing. With regard to how Israel is conducting its operations, I think you've heard the President speak to this very clearly. You've heard me speak to this very clearly. We've said, we believe strongly that Israel has not only the right, but the obligation to defend itself against it's very hard to put into words, the nature, the barbarity of the attacks. And they really do have the obligation to defend themselves against it, to do whatever they can to try to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But we've been very clear as well that the way Israel does this matters, and in particular, it's important that operations be conducted in accordance with international law, humanitarian law, the law of war, as applicable, and that everything be done to minimize the loss of civilian life. And we continue to focus on that, just as we're also focusing on getting assistance into people in Gaza who need it. There will be plenty of time to make assessments about how these operations were conducted, but I can just say for the part of the United States that this continues to be important to us. And again, it's what distinguishes us, distinguishes Israel from terrorist groups like Hamas, which not only have absolutely no concern for innocent human life, they intentionally use innocent human lives to hide behind, to use as, quite literally, as human shields, knowing that civilians invariably are going to suffer in conflict.
Thanks.
Mr. Secretary, just following up on that, Hamas has issued a statement through Abu Abaida, and I know with the huge caveat that it's a terror group and one does not attach credibility to that, but they have said that all the hostages, the civilian hostages, which include the Americans, could be released, that this could be the start of something bigger if there are no airstrikes. Would this be a moment where, if under Israel's discretion, obviously, it would be wise to pause, to give it more time to see if this is a moment, since the ground invasion has not started, should even the airstrikes be stopped, to see if you could get more people out? And it was notable, without going into details, that in the President's statement he said, he expressed his thanks to Israel, to Qatar rather, in partnership with Israel. A notable connection there. The obvious inference is that they were working together on this. Does this give you hope that, despite everything that's happened, that there could still be a broader relationship and avoid a wider war?
Thanks, Andrea. So, two things there. First, it's very simple. Hostages should be released immediately and unconditionally. That's been our position from day one. It remains our position. And to your point, I would not take anything that Hamas says at face value. I'm not sure anyone in this room would take at face value or report something that ISIS had said. Same applies to Hamas. Our position is clear. Every hostage needs to be released, and needs to be released now. There is no doubt from my own travels in the region that one of the important things throughout this this very difficult period, and since the attack, the unconscionable attack by Hamas, is to continue to find ways for countries to cooperate, coordinate when it's in their interest to do so. And we'll continue to look to that. Any cooperation that we can elicit that facilitates the release of hostages, any cooperation that we can elicit that secures the provision of humanitarian assistance to the men, women, and children in Gaza who so desperately need it. We work on that every day. And I think we can say that we've seen some of that cooperation. The broader question, though, I think is usually important, because what's abundantly clear is the vast majority of countries, the vast majority of people want the same thing. They want a region where countries are working together, where relations are normalized, where there's greater integration, where people are working together, studying together, traveling, doing business. The overwhelming majority of people want that. And we want to see as well the rights and aspirations of the Palestinian people fulfilled in the context of that kind of region. And that's one vision, and it remains very much alive in every conversation that I had. The alternative is equally clear, and it's very stark. It's Hamas, it's Hezbollah, it's Iran. It's destruction, it's death, it's terrorism, it's darkness. So the more we are able to make real that first vision, the more I'm convinced that that's the vision that everyone, or virtually everyone, will subscribe to. So even as we are working through this challenge, this crisis, it's important to keep that vision alive, because it's important that people know that there is an alternative, and that everything that they hope for and that they aspire to is going to be best addressed through what I've just described, that first vision. We'll continue to do that.
Jennifer.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. What can you tell us about the condition of these two Americans who have been released? What is their health status? And do you have any details on the condition of the Americans who are being held hostage? Have you seen any proof of life on them? And then on the Rafah crossing, what is the holdup in operationalizing this deal? And will we see it open this weekend?
I can't speak to the condition of the two hostages who were just released. First, out of respect for their privacy. Second, because we haven't had a chance yet, maybe it's happening as we speak, to get our own team in there to see them, to evaluate them, and most importantly, to reunite them with their loved ones. So I'm sure that'll come out in the hours, certainly the days ahead, but I don't have anything for you on that now. Nor do I have anything for you on the status of or condition of Americans who continue to be held by Hamas. With regard to the Rafah crossing, as you know, when some of us were traveling together in the region over the past week, getting assistance moving was among my top priorities. And we worked very hard with the government of Israel, the government of Egypt, to do just that. And we secured an understanding that we would develop a plan to move assistance. That understanding was cemented by President Biden when he was in Israel, and also speaking to President al-Sisi of Egypt. In the time since, we've been working relentlessly with Ambassador David Satterfield on the ground, working with the United Nations, with Egypt, with Israel, to put that into motion. And my expectation is that you'll see that moving soon. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So Antony Blinken saying that he expects a team from the US Embassy in Israel to receive these two hostages, Judith and Natalie Raanan, shortly. They were handed to the Israelis at the border with Gaza by the Red Cross, saying, though, that he couldn't comment yet on how they are, what condition they are in. Well, let's speak to James Matthews now. Speak in a moment to our International Affairs Editor, Dominic Waghorn, in Amman. First of all, though, to James Matthews, who's in Washington and listening into that. And Mr. Blinken's news conference, James, following a statement from the President, Joe Biden, in which he said he was overjoyed and working tirelessly for the release of other hostages.
Yes, Anna, he has said that has been his top priority throughout. I thought Antony Blinken, didn't give us much there, did he? He certainly countered the narrative from Hamas, who, since the release of these two hostages, speaking about a humanitarian gesture, have perhaps been trying to style themselves as the good guys in this propaganda war, saying that they are trying to undermine the claims by Joe Biden that they are depraved, terrorists, guilty of unadulterated evil. I think that's why we saw Antony Blinken present there. I think the question in his mind and in the minds of Americans will be, how did that work? How did we get these two out? What was the magic formula employed by the Qataris that won the argument to secure the release of two? How can we use that formula with regard to the 200 others? I think, Anna, it's worth bearing in mind that in this war situation, we are in a propaganda war. You don't have to be a cynic to conclude that Hamas will see a propaganda value in this. They've listened to Joe Biden denouncing them. They are conscious that around the world there are people who, of course, lean towards the Palestinian cause in all of this. And I think they will see the benefit in countering the narrative. They think that this gesture will resonate with that particular constituency and complicate the politics for pro-Israelis like Joe Biden as he tries to secure fresh funding to bolster Israel's war effort. One final thing I'd say, Anna, as well, in terms of the timing, and again, this plays into the propaganda in all of this. If we are to assume that the time between now and the Israeli land assault is the best window in which to get hostages out alive, then you can see why Hamas releasing these hostages at this time might think that that amplifies calls to extend that window of opportunity. It raises the question, certainly, indeed you heard that question raised for Antony Blinken. He was asked, does this mean that there should be some kind of winding down of Israeli air assaults? That is a question prompted by perhaps this Hamas gesture. They'll be fully cognizant of the value of that. But clearly it's good news. It's a small piece of good news, but it is only 2 out of 200. A mother and daughter who'd made a trip from Evanston, Illinois in the United States for a grandmother's birthday party. They were taken on October the 7th, a mile inside the Gaza, a mile over the Gaza border. They were at a kibbutz, and they've been released now, of course, into the hands of the Israeli military.
Yes, very close proximity to where they were to the Gaza border. James, there in Washington, thank you. Well, the release of the 2 American hostages follows intervention by the Emir of Qatar. It's understood to be a release and not an exchange. Let's speak now to our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. Dominic, this is hugely significant, is it not? We've had a statement from the Qataris just over an hour ago. They say this was the result of days of continuous effort. But what about that suggestion from James that, you know, possibly in the back of Hamas's mind, this is an effort to delay or thwart any ground incursion?
Yeah, I think James is exactly right there. I think there are 2 things going on here. One is the propaganda war, and one is the attempt to delay the ground war. In terms of the propaganda war, just to amplify what James was saying there, this is what the spokesperson for Hamas said shortly before the news was confirmed by the Israelis that these 2 Americans have been released. They said that for humanitarian reasons and to prove to the American people and the world that the claims made by Biden and his fascist administration are false and baseless. These 2 women have been released. So the day after Biden's here saying that Hamas is evil, Hamas is saying, no, we're not, we're humane, we're being humanitarian, we're releasing these 2 women. I think to people listening, they might wonder how an organisation that clearly carried out one of the worst atrocities in recent history, going into kibbutzes, killing innocent people, massacring, breaking up families, killing children, abducting old people and murdering some people in murders that were live streamed on their Facebook pages, say their relatives. How can any organisation claim to be humane and humanitarian following all that? Well, there is a battle for the hearts and minds of people across this region, and it's very important in Hamas's mind that it pushes back against whatever propaganda, as they see it, the American president has come here to project in their own region. But also what's going on is they are trying to delay the ground war almost certainly. And I think a number of other countries, Rishi Sunak says that nationals from 30 different countries are either missing or dead. We don't know exactly how many hostages from how many different countries are being held by Hamas. But if you think about it, they will all be saying now to Israel and to Qatar, we've got nationals as well. Please hold off the ground offensive while Qatar does the same for the Americans, for us, what they've done for the Americans. So they will be putting on pressure on Israel. Hamas knows that. And therefore they will be trying to delay the ground invasion. And I don't think it's any coincidence this has come also the day after Israel made it pretty clear, saying to its soldiers that they will soon be inside Gaza. So I guess the ball is in Israel's court now to see whether they do delay the ground invasion any further, to see if more hostages can be got out by Qatar.
Dominic Waghorn in Amman, thank you very much indeed. And Israel's Defence Force said to us today, actually, that 41 different nations have people who are missing or held as hostage after that attack on October the 7th. Well, Hamas says that the American hostages, Judith and Natalie Ranan, were released for humanitarian reasons. The International Committee of the Red Cross transporting them, as I said, from Gaza to Israel. So let's get more on that hostage crisis. I'm joined now by Professor Haggai Levine, head of the medical team for the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. I know you've been keeping a very close eye on the physical and mental well-being of those hostages. But, you know, first of all, your reaction to this news and the impact it might have on other families who are waiting.
It's really a blast that Judith and Natalie Ranan were released. It gives hope for the other families. We had the Kabbalat Shabbat for the Shabbat Saturday today with families. It was heart-moving. I cried with the families because we had, you know, the chairs that are empty for the over 200 hostages that are still with the hands of the Hamas. And all of them are in urgent humanitarian aid. And the Hamas must release all of them immediately. You know, you don't need to be pro-Israeli for that. You need to be pro-human to demand the immediate release of all hostages. And for the very least, to ensure that all of them get urgent medical care. And from our report, we know that many of them either were wounded during the kidnap, again, innocent civilians, or have previous medical backgrounds that deserve attention. So I must say that also with the family, and I spoke with some of the family members of this family, there are still several of the family that are hostage by the Hamas. So imagine how difficult it is for the family. They cannot be fully joyed with this surprising release because still many of the family members are within the end of the Hamas. We see that international pressure can work. We do whatever we can. We request you, everyone who sees us, see the people behind me, please, whatever you can do to put a pressure on the Hamas and all the world leaders and all the international organizations such as the Red Cross to do whatever they can to ensure that all the hostages receive medical care, get relations with the family, because the families are worried sick from not knowing even if their beloved are alive. Think about your brother or sister, father or mother, daughter or son. If they were taken from their safe home to who knows where, maybe injured, maybe dead, you would be worried sick. So that's the situation. We have mixed feelings this evening.
Professor, you know, it's very, very difficult then for the family. Are you able to share with us how many more of that family are still missing or held hostage?
I am just not sure if that's, you know, everything could be sensitive, and we know that we face a brutal, satanic Hamas that butchered over 1,000 people. So any piece of information they may use against the hostages. So I don't know if I can say the exact number, but it's, you know, it's more than 5. It's outstanding. The entire family. And that's very, very, very difficult for the family. I must say, in our forum, it's forum for the families, with the families. Many of our volunteers are families, and actually, by incidents, I met today with 2 of the far family members of the Ranan family, and we spoke how we can aid, for example, by the word communication, for the release of the hostages. And surprisingly, tonight, we now know that 2 of the hostages are now in Israel. And I must say, they try to divide between the hostages like American citizens and, as you said, people from all over the world. It's a crime not against Israel, it's a crime against humanity.
Yes, I just wanted to ask you, we're running out of time, I just wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, clearly what happens now, they've been through this utter trauma, haven't they? They've been handed over, the Red Cross has handed them over to the Israeli military, then they're going to be handed over to the US Embassy to reflect on their mental condition, if you like, and why them? Why would they have been freed?
Sure. So we have a lot of experience, unfortunately, in Israel with treatment of released hostages. Again, this is a unique situation. This is a civilian, including babies and elderly. But in general, we know that this situation, it's very, very, very difficult mentally. And here also, because it was after an attack on their home. So if someone had post-trauma, it's a continuous post-trauma. So from mental point of view, it may be, harmed for life. So we have the very good teams to provide this kind of care. And also with our Center for the Families, we have all volunteers experience mental health and physical health, workers to prepare and to help them. Of course, the first thing you do when and I don't know specific details, but the first thing you do, you check the physical status, ensure that there is no life-threatening issue now from medical conditions, from injuries. You do mental health evaluation and see what you need and what is the current status. You also may have dehydrated and may lose their weight and lose needed micronutrients, etc. So you do a complete check and you need to follow for a few hours to verify that everything is okay on the surface, but actually the harm on the soul may remain for life. And I just recently I was in an event with the hostages from the 73 war 50 years ago, and they still have flashbacks and issues with what happened when they were hostage. So prevention, as always in medicine, is the best, and it's just such an immense tragedy that should be in our consciousness, everyone around the world. Still now, over 200 people are kept hostages by the Hamas. Innocent civilians, many of them had urgent medical care. I'm thinking about care.
Professor.
I'm thinking about the Ariel and his brother Kfir, 9 months old baby. What is his fate? And we need someone to take care for them. And we are in close contact with the Red Cross, and we try to push them. It's regardless of neutrality. It's not an issue of neutrality.
Professor,
it's an issue of delivering the urgent medical care.
We fully understand that. We really appreciate your time there. Sorry to cut in. Professor Haggai Levine, head of the medical team for the hostages and the missing. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you're watching a special programme on the Israel-Hamas war. Still to come, a matter of life and death. The head of the UN slams the failure to allow aid into Gaza from Rafah. This is a very strange atmosphere, this subject of such horrific attack.
On both sides, one has to say that this is just the most awful situation.
We could hear the distant sound of gunfire.
It's a complete stalemate.
This is a war, and it's going to go on for a very long time.
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
More flares going off, a volley of rocks. Cobbles have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. We have now left Italy and entered France. Nobody's asked to check our identity. Made by people who dare to challenge.
Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why?
Meeting you. Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
It's devastating, actually.
The United Nations has described conditions in Gaza as a hellhole, with more than 1 million people displaced and supplies of water, electricity and food running out. Today, standing at the Rafah border crossing with Egypt, the UN Secretary-General made an impassioned plea for the 20 trucks that have been waiting there for days to be allowed to deliver their aid. And still, Israel's bombardments continue, with the Gaza Health Ministry, run by Hamas, saying more than 4,000 people have now been killed. A warning: this report from our international correspondent John Sparks does contain images of the aftermath of an airstrike that some may find distressing.
In the words of the United Nations, the Gaza Strip has now become a hellhole. Yet the only way to send in humanitarian aid is shut. 100 trucks packed with desperately needed supplies waiting at the Rafah crossing in Egypt, where they've been stuck for days. And it was here that the UN Secretary-General decided to ditch the diplomacy from a podium erected in front of the gate.
Behind these walls, we have 2 million people that is suffering enormously, that has no water, no food, no medicine, no fuel.
Moderation replaced with exasperation here as the Egyptians and Israelis disagree on the number and content of aid shipments.
These trucks are not just trucks. They are a lifeline. They are the difference between life and death for so many people in Gaza.
International aid agencies have become increasingly alarmed and their language increasingly strident. UN experts calling Israel's siege and bombardment unspeakably cruel. In Gaza City, the blast from an Israeli airstrike destroyed the hall and scout center at an Orthodox church. The Christian community had been using them as shelters. Put your hand under Salim, said one. as parishioners tried to extract their friends and loved ones from the rubble. This man had lost his life. God has deserted us, said some. Some, like this father of 3. Look at this child. Do you think he deserved to die? Said Ara Mansouri. He showed our team pictures of his children, Majdi, Julie and Swella. All 3 died in the blast.
This is a crime. It's a crime against humanity. This F-16 aeroplane threw these things knowing there were people down there. They did it with hatred. No one in Gaza feels safe, but being in the church gave us the feeling that we were close to God.
Israel says it doesn't target civilians as it seeks to destroy Hamas. But that means little to the congregation of St. Porphyrius, now living their own kind of hell. John Sparks, Sky News.
Well, I'm joined now by Shayna Lowe, Communications Advisor at the Norwegian Refugee Council, which has teams in Gaza. Distressing scenes once again. And in terms of the Rafah crossing, even the UN Secretary-General can't get it open. How disappointed were you today?
Every day this week has been a disappointment. As early as 4 or 5 days ago, I had colleagues asking me, we heard they're going to open Rafah, we heard aid is going to come in. And every morning when I speak to my colleague Yusuf, and he asks me what's going on because he's largely disconnected from news in the outside world, I have to bring that terrible news that no aid is getting in. We're hearing reports from our colleagues that they're starting to have to ration their foods at home, stockpile pantry staples to ensure that they have food because they're anticipating that this is going to go on for a long, long time. Water is quickly running out. People cannot find bottled water on the shelves, so folks are looking for alternatives, often unpotable water that's contaminated or unsafe, leading to a situation that's ripe for spread of infectious diseases and other issues. And then on top of that, we of course have a situation where there's no medication inside of Gaza. It's all running out, and people are desperate. People are panicking. And on top of all of these shortages, they're facing ongoing bombardments. I just received a message right before I went on 2 minutes ago from my colleague Yusuf. I said, I'm about to go on TV. What do you want me to say? He said, let them know this is one of the hardest nights that we've had yet. There have been airstrikes in the north. There are airstrikes in Khan Yunis where I am. You have to remember, Palestinians were told over a week ago that they needed to flee from northern Gaza to get to the south in order to ostensibly be safer. And what we've seen is that there's no safe place in Gaza. Palestinians are being targeted everywhere. One of our colleagues just this week lost her only son in an airstrike, 6-7-year-old son. And the situation is just getting worse and worse, with people literally starving and looking for any assistance and aid that they can get.
Well, let's talk about the south. As you said, people were told to evacuate there. You've talked about the shortages, water, food, medicine. But how are people actually living? Where are they living? And how many are camped out, per room? What have you been told?
So my colleague Yusuf, he left with his family last week. He brought about 15 members of his extended family, as well as his wife and 2 children and his mother. And they were lucky enough to have extended family in Khan Yunis who they could stay with. So I think there are about 30 of them between 2 rooms in this house. He's one of the lucky ones. We have colleagues that are in overcrowded UN shelters. We have colleagues that were unable to leave the north and are trapped in Shifa Hospital, where there's no electricity or no water, no toilet. Everyone is living under dire conditions. Yusuf told me just this week that it's the first time he's ever seen homeless people in Gaza. This is not a phenomenon that exists there. And now you have so many people, hundreds of thousands of people, who have fled from northern Gaza, seeking safety, seeking shelter, and they can't even find a roof over their heads. There simply is no place for them. This is something that we said right from the beginning when this announcement was made, that there weren't facilities able to accommodate such a large influx of people. And now you have people sleeping in the streets, people overcrowded in houses, and just suffering. Yusuf told me yesterday that his family, even though they know that their neighborhood in the north has been destroyed, that his family wants to go back, and at least there they have dignity. At least there they'd be home, because now they're just displaced people.
Yes, we've heard that before, I have to say. And in terms of the aid, the agreement was that 20 trucks could get in. Certainly Oxfam told us this week that before this war, 100 trucks would bring in aid every day. So 20, tip of the iceberg. What difference do you think it would make?
Anything at this point is needed, even if it's a small amount of aid. And while we welcome the delivery of aid, as Oxfam told you earlier this week, this needs to be scaled up tremendously in order to support the 2.3 million civilians living in Gaza. And so it's important that aid start going in. It's important that we alleviate some of that suffering. The other thing to note with the delivery of aid is that getting it through that Rafah crossing is just the first step. Then we need to think about distribution and how that assistance can be given to Palestinians in Gaza without putting humanitarians at risk while going out and seeking out the communities that need assistance the most, and also ensuring that civilians going in search of aid at distribution points aren't going to be targeted. And that's why there needs to be, if not a complete de-escalation and cessation of hostilities, at the very least, a humanitarian pause so that humanitarians can go out and do what we're meant to do, which is help people who are in need.
Shana Lowe, Communications Advisor at the Norwegian Refugee Council. Thank you very much indeed for sharing the word there that you've had from your colleagues in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now let us bring you some breaking news. We have just heard from the former NBC Middle East correspondent, Martin Fletcher. His wife is a relative of the US hostages who have been released, Judith and Natalie Raanan. Let's hear now his reaction.
I mean, can you believe it? It's like a miracle. We were talking about it yesterday, and we would, would they be human shields? Would they be killed in the invasion, Israel's invasion in Gaza? Nothing good could possibly happen. And then suddenly, bang! I mean, what an about face. Although the family clearly is celebrating, and I haven't spoken to them in the last half hour. I imagine that's because they're on the way to the border to meet Natalie and Judith. They haven't got time to talk to me. Tears of emotion. I mean, before she was crying tears of anguish. Now she's, I guess, crying tears of joy. And my wife is not a sentimental, particularly woman. She's a kibbutznik. She grew up in a hard area in the Jordan Valley. She spent 2 years sleeping in a bomb shelter when they were being shelled by the Syrians when she was a child. So she doesn't come from a background of, oh my God, this is terrible. But, tears of anguish turned to tears of joy. And she's the first one that said, that's just our family. What about the rest?
Martin Fletcher reacting then to the news that 2 of his wife's relatives have now been freed. He'd only found out about it fairly recently. So a delight there. And certainly the US President Joe Biden also saying he was overjoyed. But don't forget the others remaining. We heard from Antony Blinken that 10 other Americans are still being held. Well, you're watching a special programme on the Israel-Hamas war, still to come. Tensions in the West Bank where Palestinian protesters willingly take on Israeli snipers. 2 teenagers have been killed in clashes in the West Bank, bringing the total number killed in the Palestinian territory to 83 since the start of the conflict. A 17-year-old died in clashes at a military checkpoint in the north, while a 15-year-old was killed in clashes with Israeli forces in Ramallah. Well, the West Bank is the scene of daily clashes between Palestinians and the Israeli military, with youths continuing to protest despite the threat of snipers. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, sent this report from Ramallah and a warning it contains footage of the moment that a protester is shot.
Another day of protests on the West Bank, the stone-throwing youths and the defence forces squaring up for an exchange of rocks and bullets. They use the burnt-out hulk of a truck for cover and to get a better angle. As soon as they go forward, a sniper shoots. He's helped back and an ambulance screeches in to pick him up. They know the score. This is completely normal here. Still at the very front, a teenager takes another tyre to make more covering smoke. He skips as he crosses back, trying to outwit the snipers. But they have another target. This man had come from a different angle, but didn't get very far. The ambulance crews move in. The Israeli Defense Forces are making it absolutely clear to everyone that they mean business. I stopped counting at 9 people shot. Across the road, people take cover in a petrol station, but another round is fired.
2 ambulances have rushed forward to get the stone throwers. They shot them just a few metres from where we're standing. Ambulances come. It's a tried and trusted method. What's incredible is that they know this is going to happen. The stone throwers know they're going to be shot. The snipers know they're going to be shooting them, and it goes on and on and on. And they'll be whisked away now to hospital, and it'll go on. It's been going on all day.
The streets of Ramallah echo to the chants of people protesting against the actions of Israel, but also against the countries who have given their support. The United States and Britain are at the top of the list. The city centre came to a standstill, men, women and children joining the procession as it made its way through the streets.
Our enemy is not just Israel. Our enemy is the United States government, not people. We are appreciating every single voice that came out, especially from Jewish Voice for Peace and all these Jews that are standing up saying, don't do this massacres and decide on our names. This is our allies. This is the people that we are allies with. Not with Biden and his racist government there, not with Sunak also that he came, all of them came to support the genocide in Gaza. This is a shame. They should be ashamed of themselves.
All believe Israeli soldiers will move into Gaza. All acknowledge it will lead to more violence, both here on the West Bank and further afield.
I've lived all my life under occupation. Now I'm fearful for my children, for my co-workers. I mean, this government has all the Palestinians, 5 million Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza under its complete control. We are, civilians, and they have the best weapons in the world to do whatever they want.
So the cycle of protest and violence continues. The flaming anger of Palestinians and the Arab world is burning brighter by the day. Any hope of a solution seems a completely futile wish. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News in Ramallah on the West Bank.
Now, the United States says one of its ships has shot down missiles coming from Yemen, which appeared to be heading towards Israel. The Pentagon says 3 land attack cruise missiles and several drones were brought down. If confirmed, it would be the first time the US has fired weapons in defence of Israel during this conflict. Well, here's our defence analyst, Professor Michael Clark.
The United States Navy is creating quite a build-up, both in the eastern Mediterranean off the coast of Israel and in the Red Sea. A number of US Navy ships are moving into the Red Sea. One of them that was there yesterday is the USS Carney, which is an air defense destroyer. And last night, the USS Carney intercepted 3 missiles, cruise missiles, and a number of drones that were fired from Yemen, we assume by the Houthis, towards Israel. So the destroyer did its job. But, of course, now the United States is defending Israeli airspace, and that fact won't be lost on the Arab street in the rest of the Middle East. And so it's become a sort of an open season on US military bases and US personnel in the region. There have been attacks at the Al-Assad air base and attacks at the Al-Tanf garrison, quite small attacks, and no deaths so far, but some injuries at Al-Tanf. And it looks as if independent groups acting as free agents are choosing to lob missiles and grenades at US bases where they see them in the area. The big question, of course, is what does Iran think about all of this? What does Tehran do in response to what may well be a series of spontaneous attacks against Israel and against the United States in the region? And the area that we worry about, of course, is not just Iran's actions, but what they may or may not be directing in southern Lebanon. And if we think about the areas that really worry us, it is not just Gaza, but it's the border between Israel and Lebanon. It's a hot spot at the best of times, and this border has almost become depopulated in the last couple of days. Lebanese villagers have moved out. They've anticipated a battle and they've all moved north. And Israel has cleared a lot of the towns and their own settlements in northern Israel. So civilians have moved out on both sides. And that, in a sense, has become a battlefield waiting to happen. And so as things develop in Gaza, and they won't be long before Gaza becomes another battlefront, the area that bothers us most is in southern Lebanon and northern Israel. There's been a sort of proxy battle going on there for some days now, with the Hezbollah firing rockets into Israel and Israel replying with artillery fire. It's just below the level of outright warfare. But it won't take long before that threshold is crossed, and it may well be crossed if Israel begins its operation in Gaza very, very soon. When it does, this may be the spark that extends the crisis to the rest of the region.
Professor Michael Clark there. Well, Mark Austin and I will be back tomorrow reflecting on the last 2 weeks of this bloody war. I will have a special report from a kibbutz attacked by Hamas on the 7th of October, where more than 100 people were killed. The thing about Be'eri, it was supposed to be a little piece of paradise. A dream come true for people to live here. You see the fruit growing on the trees, the collective spirit, everybody looking after each other, you know, their own agriculture growing. But it's so close to the border. It would have taken minutes, just minutes, for those Hamas militants to get here that morning. And you can see more of that in a special programme from Jerusalem tomorrow at 1 p.m. here on Sky News. Well, coming up next on Sky News at 10, hope for the families of those taken hostage by Hamas as 2 Americans are freed this evening. They're the first hostages freed of up to 200 still being held. We'll have plenty more on that coming up next.